It's finally a sunny day here at Heritage Lane Farm. Today's video is going to be about harvesting your crop at the right time. No matter what you're growing, you need to know at what point that crop should be harvested. This is the case for many of the flowers that I grow. For vegetables that might be in your garden, there are certain times that is the correct time to harvest those things. For those of you who are raising grain crops, there is a certain point in time when the moisture level is correct, and that sort of thing, that there is a correct time to harvest. So like I've said many times in class, whatever you're going to grow, no matter what it is, you need to do a little bit of research and know when the proper time to harvest your crop is, and then be monitoring your crop and looking for those things. So today it's spring. I don't have a lot of things that we're harvesting yet, vegetable wise, but I do have some flowers that we're harvesting. So today I'm going to show you tulips and talk a little bit about knowing when the right time to harvest tulips is, and also what you can do to extend the life of a crop that you're harvesting for sale. Tulips, I'm going to go ahead and pull one out, are a bulb that are planted in the fall. If you got yesterday's question correct, the correct answer is vernalization. For a crop that has to be planted, and then there has to be a period of cold before that crop will actually do what it's supposed to, that's called vernalization. I showed you the garlic. Garlic has to go through vernalization. Tulips have to do the same thing. If you planted these in the spring, you're not gonna get anything. Okay, so these were planted in the snow. I think I did this in November. They just sat out here all winter, and then they grew. Tulips, you plant them every single year if you're harvesting them for a cut flower. If you were to cut this flower for sale, like I'm going to, you take away all of its leaf energy that it's stored, and that plant won't produce a flower the next year. It'll still grow and it'll grow leaves, but you won't get a flower. So there's no point in keeping them. Tulips are also a flower that needs to be harvested at an exact point in time if you want to extend the time that flower is going to be good, just like you would a vegetable. If you want it to last a long time in your fridge, you should hope that the person who picked that vegetable picked it at the right time. The same thing goes for flowers. So for tulips, you don't want to wait until they're open and beautiful. You actually want to pick them when they're still green and look like they're not going to do anything. When the tip of the flower just starts to show color and the rest of it is still green, that's the appropriate time to pick this tulip. It shouldn't be really soft. If I can squeeze the tulip and it's just like a petal and it's soft, it's already too far out. That flower isn't going to last very long in the vase. But if I touch this here, it's still pretty solid, and I just see a little bit of color and the rest is green. So that's the correct time to harvest this tulip. I would then, if I'm going to go ahead and put it in my bouquets for this week's farmer's market, I would go ahead and cut the bulb off, wash the dirt off of the stem, and put it in a bucket and let it color the rest of the way, and it's going to get sold tomorrow. Now, if I want to hold on to these flowers for a longer period of time, I can do that. You can't do that with all flowers, but there are some that you can store for quite a while. So I also want to talk briefly about that. In order to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and pull a couple more tulips because I'm trying to save them for a wedding on May 15th. Usually tulips are dead and gone by May 15th. They happen to have lasted a little bit longer this year because it's still been cold, and so they haven't opened nearly as quick. But generally they'd be gone by May. They're a spring flower. May is almost summer and we don't have tulips. Okay, so I have a small bunch of tulips here that aren't open all the way. They've just started to color, so this is a great time to harvest them, but I want to store them for a month. To do that, I'm going to take them back to my shop, and I'm going to just wash off the bottom. I am not going to cut the tulip stem off of the bulb. The reason for that is that a bulb, it's actually part of the stem. It's not part of the root. You can see the root down here, but that stem, that part of that stem does hold energy for this plant. So if I go ahead and cut the bulb off, I've just gotten rid of the energy that this plant needs to open up the rest of the way, and I don't want to do that. So I leave the stem attached to the bulb. I'm just going to wash them off. Then we're going to take a little bit of newspaper and we're just going to wrap our stems up. And there's a reason for that, and that's going to be your question. But we're going to take newspaper and we're just going to wrap these stems up gently in this newspaper so that you're blocking light from the leaves and the flower itself. Okay, so I would want to wrap up another piece down here. Wrap these completely up in their newspaper. And then I'm just going to get one of our containers that we use to harvest vegetables, and I'm going to set my tulips down in that container, and I'm going to go ahead and put them in my cooler. Right at the moment, our cooler is set to 45 degrees, which is typical temperature for a tulip to be blooming. But I can store a tulip just like this for up to a month, and then take them out, put them in some water and some warmer temperatures, and they will continue to open up. And I'm going to take you to the cooler now and show you some that I harvested 3 weeks ago that I have let open up. All right, so now I'm standing outside of our cooler. I have quickly wrapped up a couple bunches of those tulips that I just pulled and put them in my storage container. We're just going to put a lid on them and just set them inside the cooler. They don't need any water. You actually kind of want them to dehydrate a little bit so that they don't mold when they're in storage, especially if you're storing them for a month in a cooler. So again, make sure no matter what crop you're growing, you do check to make sure that you're harvesting at the correct time. The same thing would happen, with corn. If you harvest corn and it's still too moist, what's going to happen? It's going to mold when you go to store it, and then you've wasted your crop. So no matter what it is, make sure that you harvest it at the correct time. And then for storage, we're going to go in the cooler, and I'll show you what some tulips look like that have been stored. Okay, so these tulips were picked about either 2 to 3 weeks ago, and because we weren't going to our farm market then, but I didn't want them to just bloom and not be used. So I did the same thing. I wrapped them up, I put them in the cooler, and then yesterday I took them out, I cut the ends, and I put them in a bucket of water. So as you can see here, they have rehydrated, their leaves are nice and perky, and they're starting to finish coloring out. They're not green anymore. This tulip will continue to open in a vase or in a bouquet, whoever buys it, and take it home and enjoy it as if I had just picked it today. But I didn't. I picked it 3 weeks ago. Now, your question for today. There's my other babies sitting down there. All of those picked 2 to 3 weeks ago, looking very fresh. All right. So your question for today. Actually, let's go out in the cooler because it's loud in here. Come on, buddy. Okay, your question. I put the tulips in a container and I wrap them in newspaper. The newspaper does help to keep them dry so they don't mold or anything like that, but it serves another purpose. I'm trying to keep light away from the leaves and the flower of that plant. Because tulips, like many other crops, if they're exposed to light, they're going to bend toward that light. So if I just put the tulips in that container and I flip the lights on in the cooler, or if I bring them out before I get them in their bucket in a few weeks, those tulips are going to lean towards that light. And then when I take them out of their container, I'm going to have tulip stems that are, going everywhere. And nobody wants that in a vase. They don't want that in their wedding bouquet, whatever. You want a straight stem on the tulip. So, sunflowers do this. If you are starting seeds for your garden and you put them in a windowsill, you'll probably see that they tilt towards the sun. Other crops outside, if you pay attention to field crops, they'll lean towards the sun. Leaves of trees on a sunny day will tilt themselves towards the sun. That's harder to see because it's a slower process, but they do it. If a plant plant is like that and they lean towards the sun, what is this called? Plant and animal science, we talked about this when we did crop science in like October, so rack your brain. My other class, you guys, we didn't go over this in depth, but I did show you the picture of a sunflower. So a plant turning towards the sun is called what? Send me your answers.